Evelyn was always the dumb one, my father said into the microphone as the entire ballroom laughed around him. Even now, at 67 years old, sitting beneath crystal chandeliers in a navy silk dress I could barely afford, I still felt 12 every time Richard Carter looked at me that way. Small. Embarrassing. Like an apology standing in the corner of someone else's success story. My brother Michael laughed the loudest, of course. He nearly spilled his bourbon as he slapped the table. Dad, remember when she tried balancing the company books in high school, he said. We lost 3 invoices and almost paid the electric bill twice. More laughter. My mother Diane lowered her wine glass with that tight little smile she used whenever she wanted to pretend cruelty was charm. Your father means well, sweetheart, she said softly, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Math was never your strength. I smiled politely and folded my hands in my lap because after decades in this family, I had learned something important. The people who humiliate you in public are always disappointed when you refuse to fall apart in front of them. The party continued around me like nothing unusual had happened. Servers carried trays of crab cakes and champagne through the enormous ballroom at the Hartford Regency Hotel, while former executives from my father's manufacturing company congratulated him on 40 years in business. A jazz trio played near the dance floor. Gold balloons floated near the ceiling. Everything looked elegant, expensive, perfect, and right in the center of it all sat the Carter family golden child. Michael wore a tailored charcoal suit and a Rolex my parents had bought him after his 3rd failed business venture. My father still introduced him as the future of the family. Never mind the bankruptcies. Never mind the gambling debts quietly cleaned up over the years. Michael was charming, confident, loud. In my family, those qualities mattered more than competence ever did. I reached for my water glass as another wave of laughter rolled across the table. My fingers trembled slightly, though I kept my expression calm. Across the ballroom, floor to ceiling, windows overlooked downtown Hartford glowing beneath the April rain. The city lights blurred against the glass like watercolor paint. I focused on them instead of the voices around me, instead of the familiar ache pressing against my ribs. You okay over there, Evelyn? Michael asked with a grin. Don't worry. We still love you, even if you were the family disappointment. More laughter. My mother touched his arm lightly, pretending to scold him while smiling the entire time. Stop teasing your sister. But she wasn't defending me. None of them ever did. I looked down at the linen napkin folded neatly beside my plate and remembered something my grandmother Rose used to tell me when I was little. Quiet people always hear the truth first. At that exact moment, a large television near the ballroom bar interrupted the music with a breaking business report. Several guests turned toward the screen as the anchor announced that a major artificial intelligence company called Nexus Systems had just been acquired in a $940 million deal. The ballroom buzzed with impressed murmurs. Michael whistled under his breath. God, imagine getting in on something like that early, he said. That's real money. My father nodded thoughtfully. Smart investors make fortunes while everyone else wastes time. I slowly lifted my glass and took a sip of water, hiding the small smile threatening to appear at the corner of my mouth, because sitting quietly inside my purse, unopened and unnoticed beneath the table beside my chair, was an overnight envelope from Bennett and Rowe Financial containing a $47 million distribution check tied to Nexus Systems. And not a single person in that ballroom had any idea that the dumb one owned more of the company than almost anyone else. I left the ballroom before dessert was served. No one noticed at first. That was another thing I had learned over the years. In my family, I was only visible when they needed someone to laugh at. The rain had grown heavier outside the Hartford Regency Hotel, turning the sidewalks slick beneath the yellow streetlights. I pulled my wool coat tighter around my shoulders and walked slowly toward the parking garage with my purse clutched against my side. Inside that purse sat more money than anyone in the Carter family had ever imagined I could possess. Yet all I could think about was a memory from 2nd grade. I was 8 years old when my teacher asked the class to read aloud from a history book. The words on the page seemed to slide around every time I looked at them. Letters flipped backward. Sentences tangled together like knots. I remember the boys in the back row laughing while I stumbled through a paragraph about Abraham Lincoln. I remember my cheeks burning so badly I thought I might faint. But what stayed with me most was not the laughter at school. It was what happened later that night at the dinner table. My father poured himself coffee and said, Michael reads 3 grade levels ahead. Evelyn can barely finish a sentence. My mother sighed the way tired women do when discussing a disappointing appliance. Some children simply are not academic. They talked about me as if I were not sitting there holding a fork in trembling hands. Nobody asked whether I was scared. Nobody asked whether something deeper was wrong. Back then, people did not talk much about learning disabilities in small Connecticut suburbs. A struggling child was simply labeled lazy or slow, and once that label attached itself to you, it followed you forever. Michael became the family success story before he was old enough to drive. Straight teeth, varsity baseball, loud confidence. My parents adored all the things about him they could proudly display to neighbors. Meanwhile, I learned to survive quietly. I worked after school at a diner off Route 44 refilling coffee cups for truck drivers and exhausted nurses coming off late shifts. I memorized orders faster than anyone else because numbers made more sense in patterns than on paper. One cook there used to tell me, I noticed details other people missed. You see things sideways, he once said while slicing tomatoes behind the counter. That is not stupidity. That is perspective. It was the nicest thing anyone had ever said to me at the time. When I was 23, my grandmother Rose became sick. Ovarian cancer. My parents barely visited her during those final months because Michael had just started another business venture and needed financial support. So I became the one driving her to appointments, organizing medications, and sleeping in the chair beside her hospital bed while machines hummed softly through the night. One evening, rain tapped gently against the nursing home window while she held my hand with surprising strength for someone so fragile. Do not let small people decide your worth, she whispered. The loudest ones usually understand the least. After she passed away, I found out she had left me $8,000 in a small investment account. My father called it sentimental nonsense. Michael joked that I would probably lose the money within a year. I never answered either of them. I simply deposited the check quietly and kept working double shifts at the diner while everyone else continued believing I was the family failure. And maybe that was the moment everything truly began. Because when people decide you are harmless, invisible, or unintelligent, they stop paying attention to what you are becoming. The diner where I worked sat between a gas station and an abandoned video rental store just outside Hartford. Most people barely noticed it when they drove by on Interstate 84, but for almost 15 years, that little place became the center of my life. The floors always smelled faintly of coffee grounds and lemon disinfectant. The ceiling fans rattled during summer heat waves, and the red vinyl booths squeaked every time someone slid across them. I worked 6 days a week there, sometimes 7 when another waitress called in sick. Morning shifts started before sunrise. I would tie my apron strings in the dark kitchen while the cook, Walter, flipped bacon on the grill, and country music played softly from an old radio near the freezer. My life was small back then, predictable, quiet, and according to my parents, exactly what someone like me deserved. Michael used to stop by the diner occasionally, wearing expensive suits my father paid for. He would sit at the counter scrolling through business magazines while talking loudly about investors and expansion opportunities. Once, he handed me a $10 tip in front of his friends and said, "Do not spend it all in one place, Evelyn." They laughed like he was charming. I smiled because arguing only made people crueler. But Walter noticed everything. He was in his late 50s with rough hands and tired blue eyes that seemed permanently narrowed from years of cigarette smoke and kitchen heat. One snowy evening after closing time, he found me sitting alone at booth 7 studying a newspaper business section someone had left behind. "You actually read those?" he asked. I nodded self-consciously. "Sometimes." He slid into the booth across from me and pointed toward a tiny article buried near the bottom corner of the page. "That kid comes in here sometimes," he said. "Skinny fellow with glasses. Talks too fast. Says he is building software that helps hospitals organize patient records." I glanced at the name beneath the article. Daniel Mercer, 28 years old, founder of a struggling technology startup called Nexera Systems. The company had fewer than 10 employees and operated out of a rented office above a hardware store in New Haven. "Most people think he is crazy," Walter said while sipping burnt coffee from a chipped mug. "But crazy and smart usually look the same at first." I do not know why I remembered those words. Maybe because I understood what it felt like when people decided your future before you had the chance to build one. A week later, Daniel came into the diner himself. He looked exhausted. His tie was crooked, and there were dark circles beneath his eyes like he had not slept in days. He apologized twice for ordering only coffee because his company payroll had bounced that morning. While refilling his cup, I noticed stacks of handwritten notes spread across the counter beside him. Charts, numbers, ideas. Most people would have ignored them, but patterns always made sense to me in ways conversations never did. Your growth projections are off, I said quietly before I could stop myself. Daniel blinked at me. Excuse me. I pointed carefully toward one page. You are calculating based on individual hospital contracts. But if you license the system through statewide networks instead, your retention rates would stabilize. He stared at me for several seconds like I had suddenly started speaking another language. Then slowly he smiled. Not politely, not mockingly, genuinely. It was the first time in my entire life that someone looked at me as if my mind might contain something valuable. Over the next year, Daniel came into the diner almost every Thursday night. Sometimes we talked about software, sometimes business models, sometimes nothing at all. He once told me that investors kept dismissing him because he was too young and his ideas sounded unrealistic. I laughed softly at that. People are uncomfortable around things they do not understand, I told him. One rainy November evening, he slid a folder across the counter toward me. I know this sounds insane, he said carefully, but I want to offer you early shares in the company. I cannot pay much right now, but one day this could become something huge. I looked down at the paperwork while thunder rolled softly outside the diner windows. $8,000. Every penny my grandmother had left me. My entire safety net. And for the first time in my life, I realized I trusted my instincts more than my family's opinion of me. I signed the paperwork 3 days later at a tiny legal office above a bakery in downtown Hartford. The entire room smelled like cinnamon rolls and old paper. Daniel sat across from me in a wrinkled blue sweater, nervously tapping his pen against the conference table while the attorney explained terms neither of us could fully afford to misunderstand. I remember staring at the final page for a long time before writing my name. $8,000. Everything my grandmother had left behind. Every overtime shift at the diner. Every dollar carefully folded into coffee cans above my refrigerator for emergencies. Gone with one signature. You know this might fail completely, the attorney warned gently. Most startups do. Daniel looked embarrassed hearing it said aloud. But I surprised myself by smiling. Most people already think I am foolish, I said quietly. I can survive one more disappointment. After that, life continued. Almost exactly the same on the surface. I still worked double shifts. Still drove my old Ford sedan with the broken heater during Connecticut winters. Still listened politely while my parents praised Michael for mediocre accomplishments dressed in expensive packaging. But something inside me had changed. For the first time in my life, I possessed a secret that belonged entirely to me. Every few months, Daniel would stop by the diner with updates about Nexus systems. At first, the progress sounded small. One hospital contract in Rhode Island. A software expansion in Massachusetts. Then suddenly insurance companies became interested. Then statewide medical networks. The company moved into a larger office building. Investors started calling. Technology magazines began mentioning Daniel's name beside words like visionary and disruptor. Meanwhile, Michael continued failing upward under the protection of my parents' money. One year, he opened a luxury fitness chain that collapsed within 8 months. Another year, he tried importing Italian kitchen appliances before losing nearly $200,000 in inventory nobody wanted. My father always blamed the economy. My mother blamed dishonest business partners. Nobody ever blamed Michael. At Thanksgiving dinners, they still treated him like a misunderstood genius waiting for the world to catch up. And me? I remained the quiet daughter, serving mashed potatoes while conversations drifted around me as if I were part of the furniture. One Christmas Eve, Michael arrived nearly an hour late wearing a camel cashmere coat and carrying expensive wine he had clearly not paid for himself. We sat around my parents' dining room beneath soft yellow lights while snow fell steadily outside. My mother had used the good china with gold trim she only brought out for special occasions. Halfway through dinner, Michael started complaining about taxes and government regulations ruining entrepreneurship. People do not understand what it takes to build real wealth, he announced dramatically. My father nodded proudly. Then Michael glanced toward me with a smirk. Although I guess none of that matters if your biggest investment strategy is collecting waitress tips. My mother laughed softly into her napkin. My father did not correct him. I looked down at my plate and continued cutting turkey into small pieces while heat crawled slowly up my neck. At that exact moment, hidden quietly inside a filing cabinet in my apartment, Nextra stock certificates were already worth more than my parents' entire house. But I said nothing. I had learned long ago that revealing your strength too early only gives cruel people time to prepare for it. Years passed that way. Quietly. Carefully. Nextra expanded into California, then Chicago, then overseas. Daniel sent me handwritten notes every Christmas thanking me for believing in him when almost nobody else had. I kept every one of them inside a shoebox beneath my bed. Sometimes late at night after exhausting shifts at the diner, I would sit alone at my kitchen table with those letters spread around me and wonder what my grandmother Rose would think if she could see me now. Not rich. Not yet. But no longer invisible to myself. And perhaps that was the first real fortune I had ever earned. By the time I turned 67, my life had become so routine that most people would have called it ordinary. I rented a modest second-floor apartment above a florist shop in West Hartford where the hallway always smelled faintly of roses and dust. Every morning, I woke at 5:30, brewed coffee in the same chipped ceramic mug, and listened to the local weather report while feeding the pigeons that gathered outside my kitchen window. The diner had closed 3 years earlier after Walter retired, so I spent part of my week bookkeeping for a small hardware store and the rest volunteering at the public library, helping children learn to read. Ironically, the woman once called slow had become very good at teaching frightened children how to navigate words without shame. Life was quiet, peaceful in some ways, lonely in others. My parents still hosted elaborate family gatherings where Michael dominated every conversation while Diane floated around the dining room bragging about his latest opportunity. Sometimes I wondered whether they actually believed the stories they told themselves about him. Success had become theater in our family. Appearances mattered more than truth. 2 weeks before the company anniversary party at the Hartford Regency Hotel, Michael invited me to lunch for the first time in nearly 8 months. He chose an expensive steakhouse downtown where the menus did not list prices openly. I arrived wearing my gray wool coat, while businessmen in tailored suits filled the restaurant with loud conversations about markets and golf memberships. Michael barely looked up from his phone when I sat down. "You look tired," he said casually. "Are you still doing that library volunteer thing?" I smiled politely. "I enjoy it." He nodded absently. "Well, Dad and Mom are getting concerned about you." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. Michael leaned back in the leather booth and lowered his voice like he was discussing something delicate. "They think it might be time for you to move into a senior living community." I stared at him for several seconds without speaking. "I beg your pardon." He sighed dramatically. "Do not make this emotional, Evelyn. You are alone. You are getting older. Your apartment building does not even have an elevator." He cut into his steak before continuing. "Honestly, none of us know how you are surviving financially." There it was. The real concern. Not my health. Not my happiness. Money. Michael had always believed poverty and failure were the same thing. "I am managing just fine," I said quietly. He gave me a skeptical look. "Come on. You worked in diners your whole life. You cannot possibly have much saved." I stirred my iced tea slowly while sunlight reflected against the restaurant windows. 25 years earlier, comments like that would have humiliated me. Now they simply revealed him. "You know," Michael continued with a smug little laugh, "Dad says you were never practical about money. Too emotional. Too trusting." I nearly smiled at the irony of hearing financial advice from a man whose third bankruptcy filing had quietly disappeared thanks to my father's lawyers. But again, I said nothing. Silence unsettles arrogant people far more than anger ever does. Lunch ended awkwardly. After that, Michael insisted on paying the bill in a performative gesture generous enough for nearby tables to notice. Outside the restaurant, cold March wind swept through downtown Hartford while taxis splashed through dirty rainwater near the curb. Michael adjusted his coat collar and looked at me almost pityingly. "You should think seriously about what I said," he told me. "You do not want to become a burden later." Burden. The word followed me all the way home. That evening I unlocked my apartment door, fed the pigeons outside the kitchen window, and sorted through the day's mail beneath the soft yellow glow of the overhead light. Most of it was ordinary. Utility bills, grocery coupons, library notices. Then I saw the overnight envelope resting quietly at the bottom of the pile. Bennett and Rowe Financial. My pulse slowed instead of quickening. Somewhere deep inside, I already knew my life had just divided itself into before and after. I stood in my kitchen for almost 10 minutes staring at the overnight envelope without opening it. Outside the apartment window, rain slid slowly down the glass while headlights from passing cars stretched across the wet street below like pale ribbons of light. The old clock above my refrigerator ticked softly in the silence. Somewhere downstairs, the florist shop owner was locking up for the night. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. Yet my hands trembled slightly as I reached for the envelope, because after 25 years of waiting quietly, part of me was afraid reality might still disappoint me at the very end. I sat at the small wooden table beside the window and carefully slid my finger beneath the seal. Inside were several documents printed on thick cream-colored paper along with a handwritten note from Daniel Mercer himself. Evelyn, it read, none of this would have existed without you believing in me before anyone else did. Thank you for seeing value where the world saw risk. Beneath the note rested the distribution statement from the acquisition deal. $47,214,000. I read the number 3 times before setting the papers down carefully beside my coffee mug. Not because I doubted it, because my mind simply did not know where to place a number that large inside the life I had lived. The apartment around me remained exactly the same. The faded curtains, the second-hand bookshelf, the radiator that clicked loudly every winter night. Wealth had arrived quietly, without fireworks or applause. And strangely, the first thing I felt was sadness. Not excitement, not triumph. Sadness for the woman I had once been. The young waitress who believed she deserved humiliation because the people closest to her repeated it often enough. I thought about every family dinner where Michael performed confidence while my parents mistook arrogance for intelligence. Every holiday where my silence became evidence of weakness. Every moment I had apologized simply for existing differently from what they wanted. The next morning, my phone rang before 8 o'clock. Harold Bennett from Bennett and Rowe Financial spoke in the calm, measured tone of a man accustomed to handling life-changing numbers. Miss Carter, we should discuss immediate asset protection and tax strategy, he explained. This level of liquidity will attract attention quickly once public filings finalize. Attention. I almost laughed quietly at the word. My entire life had been built around avoiding attention. Harold arranged to meet me that afternoon at his office downtown. I wore my usual gray coat and sensible shoes while people in expensive business attire hurried through the marble lobby carrying laptops and coffee cups. Nobody looked twice at me. An older woman with silver hair and a department store handbag was invisible in places like that. Harold greeted me warmly and guided me into a conference room overlooking the Hartford skyline. He explained trusts, investment diversification, real estate structures, and media confidentiality while sliding folders neatly across the polished table. I listened carefully, asked questions calmly. The same woman my family considered incapable of understanding finances followed every conversation without difficulty. Halfway through the meeting, Harold paused and removed his glasses. "Forgive me for saying this," he said gently, "but you seem remarkably composed." I looked out the window at the city below. "People assume money changes you overnight," I replied quietly. "But humiliation trains you to stay calm long before success ever arrives." Harold nodded slowly like he understood more than he intended to say aloud. Before leaving, he handed me a temporary banking statement connected to the new account transfers. The numbers looked surreal beneath my name. Evelyn Carter. Millions where there had once been overdraft notices and careful grocery budgets. As I walked back toward my apartment later that evening, cold winds swept through the streets carrying the scent of rain and car exhaust. For the first time in decades, I noticed something strange inside myself. I was no longer afraid of my family's opinions. Because once you realize the people judging you were wrong all along, their voices lose the power they spent years convincing you they had. 3 days after the acquisition became public, my family started calling. Not texting, calling. The first voicemail came from my mother at 6:42 in the morning while I was watering the small fern beside my kitchen sink. Her voice sounded unusually bright, almost nervous. "Sweetheart, your father and I saw the news about that technology company. We had no idea you were involved in something so impressive." She paused awkwardly before continuing. We are very proud of you. I stood there holding the watering can while rain tapped softly against the window. Proud. The word felt strange coming from her, like hearing someone suddenly speak a language they had mocked for decades. An hour later, Michael called twice before I finally answered. Evelyn, he said loudly, as if we were lifelong friends instead of siblings who barely tolerated one another. Why did you never tell us about this? I leaned against the kitchen counter and watched pigeons gather outside near the fire escape. You never asked, I replied calmly. Silence stretched briefly across the line. Then Michael laughed too hard. Come on, sis. Do not be like that. Families share things. Families. Interesting choice of word from a man who once called me a financial burden over lunch. By the weekend, everything had changed. My mother suddenly wanted me at Sunday dinners again. My father left a voicemail inviting me to lunch at his country club for the first time in nearly 15 years. Michael began sending links to beachfront properties in Florida alongside messages about investment opportunities we could explore together. It was astonishing how quickly affection appeared once money entered the room. I accepted the dinner invitation mostly out of curiosity. Part of me needed to see whether guilt had softened them at all. Another part already knew the answer. My parents' dining room looked exactly the same as it had throughout my entire adult life. The polished mahogany table, crystal candle holders, family photographs carefully arranged to showcase Michael's milestones while mine remained almost entirely absent. Yet the atmosphere felt different the moment I walked in. My mother hugged me too tightly. My father pulled out my chair at the table like I was a visiting dignitary instead of the daughter he once described as disappointing in front of strangers. Michael arrived carrying an expensive bottle of wine and smiling so broadly it looked painful. There she is, he announced dramatically. The genius investor. Genius. Not long ago, they could barely say my name without attaching a joke to it. Dinner unfolded beneath layers of forced warmth so thick it almost became embarrassing. My mother asked questions about stock markets she clearly did not understand. My father listened with narrowed eyes every time I spoke, recalculating me in real time like an accountant reviewing incorrect numbers. Michael bragged to everyone about having always known I was smarter than people realized. I nearly choked on my iced tea hearing that. Then came the moment I had been quietly expecting all evening. My father folded his napkin carefully beside his plate and cleared his throat. Michael mentioned you are working with wealth advisors now, he said. Smart move. Managing that level of money can become overwhelming. There it was again. That subtle assumption that I needed guidance because I could not possibly handle success alone. I'm doing just fine, I answered. Calmly. Michael leaned forward eagerly. Actually, I have been thinking maybe we should partner on something. Real estate maybe. Luxury developments are exploding right now. My mother smiled warmly at me across the table. Families should build wealth together, sweetheart. I looked around the room slowly. The expensive wallpaper. The silver serving dishes. The people who spent decades convincing me I was incapable of understanding the very thing they now wanted access to. Strange how success does not erase old memories. It sharpens them. I remembered every insult with perfect clarity while Michael talked excitedly about business opportunities he expected me to fund. And sitting there beneath the soft dining room lights, listening to my family reinvent history right in front of me, I finally understood something painful. They had never truly seen me before. They only saw value once the world attached a dollar amount to my existence. 2 weeks after that dinner, I discovered something that finally explained the shape of my entire life. It happened on a gray Tuesday afternoon while I was helping my mother organize old paperwork in the attic above my parents' garage. Diane had suddenly become very interested in spending time together now that the newspapers were calling me a millionaire investor. She invited me over for coffee twice a week, complimented my clothes, asked about my childhood memories like she was trying to rewrite them into something softer than they had been. That afternoon sunlight filtered weakly through the tiny attic window while dust floated through the air in pale golden streaks. Cardboard boxes lined the walls beside old Christmas decorations and faded family photo albums. My mother sat cross-legged on the floor sorting tax returns while I opened a dented metal filing cabinet near the back corner. Most of this can probably be thrown away, she said distractedly. I nodded absently while flipping through brittle folders labeled utilities, insurance, mortgage records. Then I found a manila envelope with my name written across the front in my father's handwriting. Evelyn Carter Educational Fund. My chest tightened unexpectedly. I sat down slowly, beside the cabinet, and opened the folder. Inside were account statements dated more than 40 years earlier. Tuition projections, savings contributions, letters from a private scholarship board congratulating me on acceptance into a summer mathematics program I had never attended because my parents claimed they could not afford it. Confused, I kept reading. Then I saw the transfer forms. Thousands of dollars originally saved for my college education had been withdrawn gradually over several years and redirected into accounts connected to Michael's first business venture. My vision blurred slightly as I stared at the signatures near the bottom of the pages. Richard Carter, Diane Carter. Approved jointly. Mom, I said quietly. My voice sounded strange even to me. She looked up immediately. What is it? I held the documents carefully in trembling hands. Why was my college fund transferred to Michael? Silence filled the attic so completely I could hear rain beginning softly against the roof overhead. Diane's face lost color almost instantly. Evelyn, she whispered. We meant to explain that years ago. I waited. She lowered herself slowly into the old armchair near the window like her knees had suddenly weakened. Your father believed Michael had more potential, she admitted quietly. His business ideas needed support. We thought you would be happier with a simpler life anyway. Simpler life. I looked back down at the paperwork while something cold settled deep inside my chest. All those years I believed I had failed because I was not capable enough, not intelligent enough, not ambitious enough. But the truth had been decided long before I was old enough to understand it. They had invested in Michael's future while quietly downsizing mine. My mother began crying softly then. We never imagined things would turn out this way, she said. Michael always struggled so much. Your father thought if we could just help him succeed one time. I almost laughed hearing that. One time. The phrase perfectly summarized my family's entire philosophy. Endless chances for Michael. Endless excuses for his failures. Meanwhile, I was expected to survive quietly, on scraps of encouragement so small they barely counted as love. I folded the documents carefully and placed them back into the envelope. My hands had stopped trembling now. Strangely, I felt calm. Not angry. Not devastated. Calm in the way people become once confusion finally turns into clarity. Does Dad know I found this? I asked. My mother wiped her eyes quickly. No. I nodded once and stood up slowly. Outside the attic window, rain fell steadily across the backyard where Michael and I used to play as children before life taught us our assigned roles in this family. Golden son. Invisible daughter. I picked up my coat from the dusty wooden railing and looked at my mother one last time. You were wrong about me, I said quietly. But the saddest part is that you never even gave me the chance to prove it back then. Then I walked downstairs while she remained alone in the attic surrounded by 40 years of decisions nobody could undo anymore. 6 months later, I stood barefoot on the porch of a small coastal house in Maine watching the Atlantic Ocean roll endlessly beneath a pale September sky. The mornings there smelled like salt water and pine trees instead of traffic and concrete. Seagulls drifted above the cliffs while waves crashed softly against dark rocks below the shoreline. For the first time in my entire life, silence no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. The house itself was modest by most standards. White siding, blue shutters, a wraparound porch with 2 rocking chairs facing the water. I could have purchased mansions in 3 different states without noticing the expense, but after spending decades surrounded by people obsessed with appearances, I discovered I no longer wanted anything designed to impress strangers. I wanted calm. I wanted honesty. I wanted mornings where my value was not measured by someone else's expectations. Back in Hartford, the Carter family continued struggling with the consequences of their own choices. Michael's newest real estate venture collapsed after several investors withdrew funding. My father quietly sold part of the company he spent 40 years building to cover mounting debts connected to Michael's failed projects. My mother called occasionally pretending she simply wanted to hear my voice, but eventually every conversation drifted toward money, opportunities, or family support. I learned to recognize emotional transactions disguised as affection. The final call came on a windy Thursday evening while I was making clam chowder in my kitchen. My cell phone buzzed against the counter beside a bowl of chopped potatoes. Richard Carter. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. My father sounded older than I remembered. Tired in a way pride usually prevents men like him from admitting. "How is Maine?" he asked awkwardly. "Quiet," I answered. Rain tapped gently against the windows while the ocean darkened outside beneath gathering clouds. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed softly. "Your mother told me about the attic." I stirred the soup slowly without responding. "We made mistakes with you, Evelyn," he continued carefully. "Back then, I truly believed Michael needed more help. You always seemed resilient." Resilient. Another interesting word. People often use it when they want credit for surviving the damage they caused. "You believed he mattered more?" I said calmly. Silence settled heavily between us. Finally, my father spoke again, his voice quieter now. "I was wrong about you." I looked out the kitchen window, toward the ocean stretching endlessly beyond the cliffs. 50 years earlier, hearing those words might have healed something inside me. But healing works differently once enough time passes. Some wounds close quietly without apologies ever arriving. "No," I said gently. "You just never looked long enough to see me clearly." My father did not answer immediately. I imagined him sitting alone in the big Connecticut house, where every conversation once revolved around Michael's future, while mine barely existed at all. Age has a strange way of forcing honesty onto people who spent their lives avoiding it. "I suppose we did not," he admitted finally. After the call ended, I carried my bowl of soup onto the porch and wrapped a blanket around my shoulders against the cold sea wind. The sky had turned deep gray now, waves rolling. Beneath the fading light, like endless moving shadows. Somewhere far behind me existed the family that spent decades calling me foolish, disappointing, forgettable. But out there beyond the cliffs, the world remained enormous and indifferent to their opinions. I thought about my grandmother Rose, Walter at the diner, Daniel Mercer with his crooked tie and impossible ideas. The few people who had seen value in me before success made it obvious. Those were the voices that mattered in the end. Not the loudest ones, not the cruelest ones, just the honest ones. A gull cried somewhere above the shoreline while I rocked gently in the porch chair and watched darkness settle across the Atlantic. Funny how people call you intelligent only after money proves it for them. But the truth is, I was never the foolish one in that family. I was simply the only person quiet enough to listen to myself instead of their limitations. An overlooked daughter spent her entire life being mocked by her parents, while her successful brother received all the praise, support, and opportunities. But everything changed when the quiet woman nobody believed in became connected to a $47 million fortune tied to a major technology company acquisition. This emotional drama explores betrayal, favoritism, hidden intelligence, and the painful reality behind toxic family dynamics as the mother and father slowly realize they misjudged their own child for decades. If you enjoy emotional family stories filled with quiet revenge, psychological tension, inheritance conflict, and powerful personal transformation, this story delivers a deeply satisfying journey about resilience, dignity, and self-worth. Watch as years of humiliation, manipulation, and emotional neglect unfold into a stunning reversal that leaves an entire family forced to confront the truth about the daughter they called a disappointment. These family stories reveal how favoritism can destroy relationships, how silence can hide extraordinary strength, and how success changes the way people suddenly treat those they once ignored. Perfect for viewers who love realistic American family stories with emotional depth, slow burn drama, and powerful endings that stay with you long after the story ends. This unforgettable story combines emotional healing, hidden wealth, betrayal, regret, and redemption in a deeply human narrative that fans of dramatic family stories will instantly connect with. Experience one of the most emotional family stories about underestimated women, broken trust, and quiet strength overcoming decades of cruelty. Character 1. A 67-year-old white American woman with silver shoulder-length hair and thoughtful blue eyes, wearing a modest navy wool sweater and simple pearl earrings. Front-facing portrait. Realistic natural lighting. Emotional expression. No cartoon, no cartoon. No CGI. No illustration. Character 2. A 72-year-old white American man with deep facial lines, gray slicked back hair, and cold blue eyes, wearing an expensive charcoal suit and dark silk tie. Front-facing portrait. Stern expression. Realistic natural lighting. No cartoon, no cartoon. No CGI. No illustration. 1. A hyper-realistic cinematic hotel ballroom scene during a wealthy corporate anniversary celebration at night. Character 1 is a 67-year-old white American woman with silver shoulder-length hair, wearing a dark navy formal dress and pearl earrings, standing silently beside a long candlelit dinner table with emotional restraint and wounded dignity in her eyes. Character 2 is a 72-year-old white American man with slicked-back gray hair, wearing an expensive charcoal suit pointing toward her with a cold, mocking expression while wealthy guests laugh in the blurry background. Crystal chandeliers glow above polished silverware and wine glasses. Rain falls outside giant windows overlooking downtown Hartford. Emotional tension fills the room, with visible humiliation, power imbalance, and family betrayal. Ultra-realistic cinematic lighting. Sharp facial expressions. Dramatic atmosphere. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No CGI. No illustration. Realistic American drama movie still. 122. A deeply emotional, realistic morning apartment scene in West Hartford. Character 1 is a 67-year-old white American woman with thoughtful blue eyes and silver shoulder-length hair, wearing a modest wool sweater and soft gray pants, standing beside a small kitchen window feeding pigeons while holding a steaming ceramic coffee mug. The apartment looks humble, warm, and lived in, with old books scattered across a wooden table, faded curtains, soft morning light, and a quiet, emotional atmosphere. Her expression feels lonely, intelligent, reflective, and emotionally exhausted, yet resilient. Outside the window, an American city street appears wet from overnight rain. Cinematic realism with natural lighting, subtle emotional storytelling, and authentic detail. No glamour, no fantasy. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No CGI. No illustration. Realistic emotional family drama movie still. 1, 2, 3. A luxurious private country club restaurant scene during late afternoon with warm golden lighting and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a green golf course. Character 2 is a 72-year-old white American man with deep facial lines, gray slicked back hair, and stern blue eyes, sitting alone at a polished mahogany table while reading financial documents beside a glass of whiskey. He wears a charcoal-tailored suit, expensive cufflinks, and a dark silk tie. His expression feels emotionally distant, proud, controlling, and quietly judgmental. Wealthy businessmen appear blurred in the background while soft sunlight reflects across crystal glasses and dark wooden walls. The atmosphere feels elite, emotionally cold, and psychologically tense. Ultra-realistic cinematic realism. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No CGI. No illustration. Authentic American family drama visual style. 1, 2, 4. A highly emotional cinematic family dinner confrontation inside an elegant Connecticut dining room during a stormy evening. Character 1 stands calmly at one side of the long dining table, holding old financial documents with quiet emotional strength in her expression, while Character 2 sits frozen in shock beneath warm chandelier lighting. A middle-aged white man in an expensive suit looks nervous beside untouched wine glasses and silver serving dishes. Rain pours outside dark windows while tension fills the room. The atmosphere feels intimate, painful, realistic, and emotionally explosive without physical aggression. Character 1 appears calm, intelligent, and finally empowered, while Character 2 looks regretful, emotionally shaken, and confronted by past mistakes. Ultra-realistic dramatic lighting and authentic American interior design. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No CGI. No illustration. Realistic cinematic family betrayal movie still. 1, 2, 5. A nostalgic roadside diner scene during a rainy autumn night many years earlier. Young adult Character 1 with soft silver-toned blonde hair tied back under a waitress apron sits across from a nervous young tech entrepreneur inside a worn red leather booth covered with handwritten notes, coffee cups, and business papers. Warm yellow diner lights reflect against rain-soaked windows, while an older cook watches quietly from the kitchen doorway in the background. Character 1 looks thoughtful, observant, and quietly intelligent, while the young entrepreneur appears exhausted, hopeful, and emotionally vulnerable. Steam rises from fresh coffee while chrome counters and old American diner decor create a grounded, realistic atmosphere. Emotional cinematic realism with strong storytelling energy. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No CGI. No illustration. Authentic American emotional drama movie still. 126. A peaceful cinematic coastal Maine sunset scene outside a modest white seaside house overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Character 1 is a 67-year-old white American woman with silver shoulder-length hair wrapped in a cream blanket while sitting alone in a wooden rocking chair on a weathered porch holding a warm bowl of soup. Character 2 appears faintly inside the house through a distant window as an older, lonely silhouette, creating emotional closure and symbolic separation. Waves crash below dark cliffs while soft orange and gray sunset light fills the sky. Character 1 looks emotionally free, reflective, peaceful, and quietly triumphant after decades of emotional pain. The atmosphere feels healing, realistic, cinematic, and bittersweet. Ultra-realistic natural lighting and emotional detail. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No CGI. No illustration. Realistic